The clock on my nightstand read 2:47 a.m. when my phone shattered the silence. At that hour, no call brings good news. I've known that for 35 years. I worked homicide, fraud, organized crime. I've received calls at every hour God made, and not one of them, not a single one after midnight, ever started with "everything is fine." I reached out in the dark, my hand sweeping across the nightstand until my fingers found the phone. The screen lit up my face with that cold blue glow that yanks you back from sleep, like a hand grabbing your collar. "Ethan," I answered before the second ring finished. "Ethan, honey, what's wrong?" My voice came out hoarse, sandpaper rough from sleep. But my heart was already wide awake, already pounding with that particular dread that grandmothers know and cannot explain to anyone who isn't one. What I heard on the other end stopped my breath entirely. "Grandma." His voice was broken into pieces, each word coming out between shallow, shaking breaths. "I'm at the police station. Vivian. She hit me with a candlestick. My eyebrow is bleeding. They put a bandage on it, but it won't stop completely, and she's telling everyone I attacked her, that I pushed her down the stairs. And Dad, Grandma, Dad believes her. He's standing right next to her nodding, and he won't even look at me. Ethan." I sat straight up in bed. My feet found the cold floor. "Which precinct?" "The one on West 10th, Greenwich Village. Listen to me carefully. Do not say another word to anyone. Not the officers, not your father, not Vivian, until I get there. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "I'm on my way." I hung up and sat for exactly 3 seconds in the dark, holding the phone against my chest. 3 seconds to let the information settle into something I could work with, rather than something that would make me scream. Then I stood up and started moving. I dressed in under 5 minutes. Black slacks, gray sweater, my good boots, the ones with the thick soles that have carried me through crime scenes and courtrooms and every hard place in between. I grabbed my purse, and then, almost without thinking, I opened the top drawer of my dresser and reached to the back, behind the reading glasses I never wear, and the birthday cards I can't bring myself to throw away. My badge, 8 years retired. The laminate was starting to peel at one corner. Commander Eleanor Stone, Criminal Investigations Division. The photo showed a woman 10 years younger with sharper eyes and less gray in her hair, but the name was the same. The authority that name carried. That was harder to measure. I turned it over in my hands once, then I put it in my back pocket. You never know. The city at 3 in the morning belongs to a different population than the city at noon. Delivery drivers, night shift nurses, insomniacs walking dogs that seem perfectly content with this arrangement. I caught a cab on the main avenue, a man in his 50s who glanced at me in the rearview mirror with the particular wariness of someone who has learned that old women hailing cabs at this hour are either in tremendous trouble or tremendous determination. "West 10th Street Precinct," I said, and he said. "Please hurry, it's an emergency." He nodded and pulled into traffic without asking questions. Good man. I stared out the window and let myself think about Daniel, my son, 42 years old. I raised him alone from the time he was 3, after his father decided that the responsibilities of fatherhood were less appealing in practice than they'd seemed in theory. I worked double shifts. I missed school plays and soccer games, and I carried the guilt of that for years. But I made sure Daniel had what he needed. A roof, food, a mother who came home every night, even when she was so tired she could barely lift her arms. He grew up good. He really did. He married a wonderful woman named Carol. They had Ethan. They built a life I was proud to watch from the edges of. And then Carol got sick. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate. She was gone in 8 months. Daniel fell apart, quietly the way strong men do, from the inside, where no one can see the structure giving way until the whole thing comes down at once. He was a widower at 37 with a 12-year-old boy and no map for where he was supposed to go next. That's when Vivian Harper appeared. I remember the first time Daniel brought her to Sunday dinner. She was 30, beautiful in that precise, deliberate way that takes real effort to make look effortless. She laughed at all his jokes. She asked me questions about my career with what seemed like genuine fascination. She helped clear the table without being asked. I watched her eyes. In 35 years of criminal investigations, I learned to watch eyes. Not for what people show you, for what they're doing when they think no one is looking. And what Vivian's eyes were doing, while her mouth smiled and her hands cleared the dinner plates, was calculating, looking around the room, measuring things. I dismissed the feeling at first, told myself I was a cynical old detective who'd seen too much and was projecting. Told myself Daniel deserved happiness and I should support him instead of searching for shadows. But the shadows were real. I just didn't move fast enough to name them before Vivian built a wall around my son that I couldn't see over. It started small. Missed calls, shortened visits. Daniel can't make it this Sunday, Eleanor. He's exhausted. You know how hard he works. Always phrased as concern. Always reasonable on its face. And then the birthday he forgot. Actually forgot. Showed up at the door 3 days later with flowers and a look of genuine confusion that broke something in me. Because I could see that he genuinely didn't know. She had managed him out of remembering. By the time Ethan started showing up alone for his weekend visits with Dad, staying with me for entire afternoons before slipping back home, I understood that whatever was happening in that house was beyond a controlling wife, but I didn't have proof, and Daniel wouldn't hear a word against her. The last time I tried, 2 years ago, he said, "You've never accepted that I moved on, Mom. You want me to be miserable because you're lonely." I didn't call him for 4 months after that. Not because I was angry, because I didn't trust myself to say anything useful. The cab stopped in front of the precinct. Gray 2-story building. Lights blazing at 3 in the morning like it doesn't know the difference between day and night, which it doesn't. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for exactly 1 breath, feeling the cold air off the Hudson filling my lungs. Then I walked in. The desk officer was young, 25 maybe. The kind of young that still shows in the way a person carries themselves, like they're not quite sure yet if they belong in the room they're standing in. He looked up when I came through the door with the automatic professional neutrality they teach at the academy. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I'm here for Ethan Stone. He's my grandson. He called me approximately 40 minutes ago." The officer checked a sheet on his desk. "The domestic assault case? Are you his grandmother, Eleanor Stone?" Something shifted in his face. A flicker, there and gone, like a light briefly interrupted. He looked at me more carefully. "Stone? Like Commander Stone? Criminal investigations?" I reached into my back pocket and placed the badge on the desk. He picked it up, read it, and then, in a gesture that made something loosen in my chest, he stood up. "My God," he said it quietly, with the reverence of someone who has heard a name so many times it had become more myth than person. And now the myth was standing in front of him in gray wool and sensible boots at 3 in the morning. "Commander, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were family. If we had known—" "Now you know," I said, and I heard my own voice, the voice I used for 35 years to walk into rooms and make the temperature change. I hadn't heard it in 8 years. It came back without effort, the way certain things do, the way your body remembers swimming even after decades away from water. "Where is my grandson?" "Waiting room with his father and with the complainant. Captain Spencer is handling the case." I stopped. "Ray Spencer?" "Yes, ma'am. Do you—" "Take me to him." Ray Spencer had been one of my best. 20 years ago, he was a 28-year-old detective with excellent instincts and a habit of second-guessing himself that I'd spent 2 years training out of him. The last I'd heard, he'd made captain. I was glad. He'd earned it. He came out of his office when the desk officer knocked, and when he saw me in the hallway, he stopped so completely it was almost comical, like a man who has walked into a room expecting Tuesday and found Thursday instead. "Commander Stone." "Hello, Ray. It's been a while." Yes, it has. I didn't know you were—" He paused, recalibrated. "Come in, please." The waiting room. I saw it all in the 2 seconds before anyone saw me looking. Ethan, sitting in a plastic chair with his right eyebrow wrapped in gauze that someone had applied without much skill, his eyes so red and swollen from crying that they were nearly closed. His hands clasped in his lap so tightly his knuckles had gone white. When he saw me, he came out of the chair like a released spring. "Grandma!" He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around my waist the way he used to when he was 7, pressing his face against my shoulder, and I felt his whole body shaking. I put my hand on the back of his head and held him there. "I'm here, sweetheart," I said into his hair. "I've got you." Over his shoulder, I took inventory of the other 2 people in the room. Daniel was standing against the far wall, arms crossed over his chest, jaw set in a way that looked like anger but moved like shame. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. But I saw guilt in there, underneath the defensiveness, the way you can see the bones of something through water. And Vivian. She was sitting with one leg crossed over the other, wearing a wine-colored satin robe that managed to look both disheveled and perfectly arranged, which is an achievement. Her brown hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders. She had a bruise on her left forearm that looked fresh, the color of a bruise inflicted in the last few hours, not the last few days. She was watching me with large, tear-filled eyes that held, underneath the surface performance of distress, something I recognized immediately and viscerally. Satisfaction. The satisfaction of someone who believes they've already won. I've seen that look on criminals in interview rooms. The ones who think that they've constructed an airtight story. They can't help it. The satisfaction leaks through the performance like light under a door. I filed it away and walked into Spencer's office. Ray Spencer had the grace to give me the facts without editorializing. Vivian had filed the complaint at 11:43 p.m., arrived at the precinct with Daniel, alleged that Ethan had returned home past his permitted time, and when confronted, had pushed her down the stairs and struck her arm. She had bruising consistent with, or at least adjacent to, her account. Ethan had a wound to his eyebrow that had required 3 stitches. The house security cameras had been non-functional for 3 days. Her version first, I said. You gave me hers. Now give me his. Ray consulted his notes. The minor alleges that Ms. Harper was already waiting for him when he came home, that she was positioned in the living room with the lights off. He states she struck him with a silver candlestick without warning, that he fell to the floor, and that while he was down she inflicted the bruising on her own arm by striking it against the wall. He says he witnessed her do this. Did you recover the candlestick? Ms. Harper states no such object exists. Did you search for it? Ray was quiet for a moment in the way that is itself an answer. We're limited in what we can do without... I know what you're limited by, Ray. I kept my voice even. What about street cameras? Neighboring properties? The house is in a private residential area on the Upper East Side. Limited public camera coverage. We're reviewing what we have. I turned to Ethan, who was sitting beside me with his hands still pressed together in his lap. Tell me everything, from the moment you put your key in the lock. Leave nothing out. He told me. His voice broke twice, once when he described lying on the floor with blood in his eye, and once when he described watching Vivian hit her own arm against the wall while looking directly at him. Not by accident, not in a struggle, looking right at him, making sure he knew. When he finished, the room was very quiet. How long has this been going on? I asked him. He looked at his hands. 6 months. 6 months of what? At first, just words, saying I was an accident, saying Dad didn't really want me around, saying I was the reason she and Dad couldn't be happy. He swallowed. Then she started breaking my things, said they were accidents. Dad believed her. Then she started. He touched the bandage over his eyebrow with 2 careful fingers. Slapping, shoving. Once she locked me in the basement for 3 hours because I told her I wanted to go visit you. I heard Ray Spencer shift in his chair. Why didn't you tell me, Ethan? Because I was scared that if you got involved, Dad would get angrier at you, and things would get worse. He finally looked up at me. I thought I could wait it out. But last week I heard something. She was on the phone, and I was walking past their room, and the door was open a little. What did you hear? He quoted it from memory, word for word, in a voice so steady it was heartbreaking. Don't worry. When the old woman dies, Daniel inherits the house. We sell it, at least $4.5 million. Then we're done with the kid. Military boarding school in San Diego. The room was silent for a long moment. Ray Spencer cleared his throat. Eleanor, legally my hands are significantly tied here. It's the word of a minor against 2 adults, one of whom has physical evidence of injury. The father is corroborating the wife's account. I can release Ethan into your temporary custody pending further investigation, but without physical evidence. Sign the papers, Ray, I said. I'll take him. While Ray prepared the release documents, I sat quietly and let my mind do what it had done 10,000 times in 35 years. Sorting, organizing, identifying the shape of what I was looking at. 6 months of escalating abuse. Cameras disabled. A story constructed and corroborated before anyone could ask questions. A child positioned as the aggressor. Physical evidence manufactured on the spot. This was not a volatile woman who had lost her temper. This was a plan. And the only question that mattered, the question that would determine everything, was how many times she had run this plan before. Daniel came in to sign the release papers and did not speak to me once. He signed with the quick, jerky movements of someone who wants the pen out of his hand as fast as possible. When he was done, he turned to leave, and I said quietly, "Daniel." He stopped with his back to me. "Your son has been hurt for 6 months. He has photographs." A pause. Then, "I have nothing to say to you." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to say anything. I'm telling you something because someday soon you're going to need to have heard it. Your son has been hurt for 6 months. He documented it. And the woman you're protecting tonight is not who you believe she is." Daniel walked out without responding. I watched him go, and I felt the particular grief of seeing someone you love walking in a direction you cannot follow, not because you don't know the way, but because they have to choose to turn around themselves. I turned back to Ethan. "Let's go home," I said. My apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator smelled like coffee and cinnamon the way it always does. I keep a cinnamon stick warming on the stove because some years ago I read that the smell of cinnamon lowers blood pressure, and I figure at 68 it can't hurt. The familiar smell hit us both when I opened the door, and I heard Ethan exhale, a long, slow release of something he'd been holding for hours. I made hot chocolate the way my own grandmother taught me. Whole milk heated slowly, real cocoa powder, a pinch of salt, a spoon of brown sugar. I cut 2 slices of the pound cake I'd bought at the bakery on the corner 2 days ago. I put everything on a tray and carried it to the living room. Ethan sat curled in the corner of my old brown sofa. I bought it secondhand 15 years ago, and it has outlasted 3 presidents and 2 mayors and shows no signs of stopping, and wrapped both hands around his mug. He took a sip, closed his eyes. For a moment he looked like a child again. "Grandma," he said after a while, "can I stay here? Not just tonight, I mean," he opened his eyes. "Can I stay? Permanently?" "Legally, your father has custody," I told him. "I can keep you temporarily while the investigation proceeds. If you want something more permanent, we'll need lawyers, paperwork, a judge." I paused. "But I want you to know something, Ethan. However long it takes to sort out the legal side, you are not going back to that house as long as Vivian Harper is in it." He nodded, looked back down at his mug. "She planned it, didn't she? Tonight, she was waiting for me." "Yes," I said, because he deserved honesty more than comfort. "I believe she did. Because I heard what she said on the phone. Partly. And partly because she's getting ready to move to the next stage of whatever this is. She needed you discredited or removed." I looked at him carefully. "You said she looked at you while she hit her own arm, while she made the bruises." "She was smiling," Ethan said flatly. "A little, like," he thought about it, "like she was showing me she could do it. Like she wanted me to know she could do anything she wanted and no one would stop her." I set down my mug and picked up the old leather notebook from the coffee table where I'd placed it when we came in. The same notebook I'd carried for decades. The same handwriting inside, cramped and precise, recording what I observed and what it meant. I opened to a blank page and wrote 2 words at the top. "How many?" "Try to sleep," I told Ethan. "Use my room. I'll take the couch." "Grandma, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. You've had a harder night than I have." I stood up and touched the side of his face gently, avoiding the bandage. "In the morning, I'm going to make some calls. And then we are going to find out exactly who Vivian Harper is. Because everything I've seen tonight tells me that she has done this before." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "What if she's done something worse than this?" "Then she'll have done it for the last time," I said. "Now sleep." He took the pound cake to the room with him. I sat alone in my living room with the notebook open in my lap, the city humming 14 floors below, and my phone in my hand. At 6:15 in the morning, I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. 4 rings. Then a voice like gravel and black coffee. "Hello? Linda, it's Eleanor Stone." A pause, then a long, slow exhale. "Commander, what time is it?" 6:15. "I'm sorry to call this early, but I need your help. And it's urgent." Another pause. This one was Linda Davis doing what Linda Davis has always done, which is process information faster than almost anyone I've ever known and arrive at the answer before the question has finished being asked. "Tell me," she said. I told her. "All of it. Ethan's call, the police station, Vivian's performance, the disabled cameras, the overheard phone call, the photographs of bruises Ethan had been silently documenting for 6 months. When I finished, Linda was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "what you're describing isn't just a controlling stepmother. I know. The pattern, the documentation, the disabled cameras, the manufactured evidence. This is someone who has done this before." A pause. "This is practiced. That's why I'm calling you," I said. "I need everything. Full name, date of birth, background, prior marriages, financial history. Whatever she's buried, I need it found." "Vivian Harper," Linda repeated. "Age? 34. Married Daniel 5 years ago. No family ever present. Claimed to come from money in Dallas, but I've never been able to verify a single detail." "Give me 48 hours. You have them. Eleanor." Linda's voice shifted, losing its professional edge for just a moment. "Are you all right?" I looked around my small living room, the old furniture, the photographs on the walls, the crucifix above the door, the cinnamon stick warming on the stove. "I'm fine," I said. "I'm angry, but angry is useful. It always was with you." I could hear her almost smile. "I'll call you in 48 hours. I set down the phone and sat in the early morning quiet for a long moment. Through the wall, I could hear Ethan sleeping, the soft, steady breathing of someone who has finally, after a long and terrible night, found somewhere safe enough to let go. I opened my notebook and started writing. What I know, what I can prove, what I need to find. The city outside my window was waking up. The first trucks, the man on the corner who sells bagels every morning without fail regardless of weather, the distant horn of something large navigating something narrow. An ordinary Friday beginning. For me, something else was beginning. For 35 years I had hunted criminals for the state of New York. I had walked into rooms that smelled like violence and walked out with truth in my hands. I had faced people who looked at me and saw an obstacle, a nuisance, a woman past her prime who could be managed or intimidated or ignored. Every single one of them had been wrong. Vivian Harper didn't know my name yet. She would. I turned to a fresh page in my notebook and wrote at the top, in the same cramped, precise handwriting I'd been using since the academy. Case file, Vivian Harper. Day 1. The 48 hours I gave Linda felt like 48 days. I am not, by nature, a patient woman. I never have been. My ex-husband, the one I was married to for 11 years before the job made that arrangement untenable, used to say that Eleanor Stone's idea of waiting was doing 5 things simultaneously while appearing to stand still. He wasn't wrong. Patience, for me, has always been an active state. You wait toward something. You wait while doing. So I waited toward the truth about Vivian Harper. The morning after the police station, I sat Ethan down at the kitchen table with a pad of paper and a pen, and I asked him to write down every incident he could remember. Every bruise, every locked door, every broken object, every overheard phone call. Dates if he had them. Times if he remembered. Every detail, no matter how small, no matter how much it hurt to write. He filled 4 pages. I read them in silence while he watched me, his hands wrapped around a second mug of hot chocolate. He's 17 and drinks hot chocolate like a 9-year-old, and I find this enormously endearing. When I finished reading, I set the pages down and looked at him steadily. "You did exactly the right thing taking those photographs," I said. "That took foresight. That took courage." He shrugged in the way teenagers do when they don't know how to accept a compliment without deflecting it. I thought maybe someday someone would believe me. "I believe you," I said. "I believed you the moment I walked into that waiting room and saw her face." "Because of her eyes?" I looked at him, surprised. "You told me once," he said, "that you can tell more from what people's eyes are doing than from anything they say. When I was little, I always remembered that." This child, this remarkable, observant, quietly brave child. "Yes," I said, "because of her eyes." On the second morning, while Ethan was in the shower, I spread everything across my dining table. The 4 pages of his written account. The 23 photographs transferred to my tablet. The notes I'd made in my leather notebook over the past 2 days, cross-referenced and organized the way I'd organized case files for 3 decades. Chronologically first, then by category of evidence, then by what each piece proved and what it didn't. The photographs were devastating in the quiet, undramatic way that real evidence always is. Not theatrical, just true. A bruise on the inside of his left forearm, the kind that comes from a grip. A bruise on his lower back, the kind that comes from being shoved into something with an edge. 3 photographs of his upper arm at different stages of healing, different colors, different dates, which meant it hadn't happened once. It had happened repeatedly over a period of weeks, and each time he had documented it alone in his room, probably with the bathroom door locked, and then hidden the photographs in a folder no one would think to look in. He had been preparing for the moment someone would finally ask. Ethan came out of the bathroom with wet hair and sat across from me at the table. He looked at the photographs laid out in rows and didn't flinch from them the way I half expected him to. He looked at them with a kind of resigned ownership, the way you look at scars. They're yours. They're part of your history. They're not something you need to perform emotions about. "The phone call you overheard," I said. "Tell me again, word for word." He folded his hands on the table. "Don't worry. When the old woman dies, Daniel inherits the house. We sell it, at least $4.5 million. Then we're done with the kid. Military boarding school in San Diego. Let someone else deal with him." You're certain of the phrasing. I've repeated it to myself every day since I heard it so I wouldn't forget. He paused. I was afraid if I forgot the exact words, no one would believe me, like it would sound less real if I couldn't get it exactly right. I thought about that for a moment. The cognitive burden of a child who distrusts his own memory because the adults around him have taught him that his perceptions can be overruled at will. That is not a small thing. That is damage that takes years to undo. "Did you tell your father?" "The next day when Vivian went out, I told him what I heard." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He said I was making things up, that I couldn't accept that he'd moved on, that Vivian had been endlessly patient with me and I was trying to make her look bad. He paused. He said it in this really tired voice, like he'd already decided the answer before I started talking. "What did you do?" I went to my room. A beat. I took a photograph of the bruise on my arm that she'd given me 2 days before, and I put it in the folder. Lord, give me strength. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. I didn't say anything. Sometimes there is nothing to say that isn't smaller than the silence it would replace. Linda Davis arrived at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 3rd day, 42 hours after I'd called her, carrying a manila folder so thick it had 2 rubber bands around it and an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. Linda is 61, black, built like a former athlete, which she is, college track, Division I, before she decided she wanted to run criminals to ground instead of other runners. She has deep-set eyes that miss nothing, and a stillness about her that makes people underestimate her, which she has exploited professionally her entire career. In 10 years as my deputy, she was the best investigator I ever worked with. In the 3 years since she opened her own private firm, she has apparently not lost a step. She walked into my kitchen, set the folder on the table, and said, "Sit down first, Eleanor." I sat down. Ethan, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway with the radar that teenagers have for significant moments, started to retreat. "Stay," I said. "You deserve to hear this." He pulled out a chair and sat. Linda looked at me. I nodded. She opened the folder. "Vivian Harper's legal name is Donna Lee Reyes," she began. "Born in Houston, Texas 34 years ago. Wait, correction. 36 years ago. She told your son she was 34. She also told him she attended private schools and came from a wealthy family in Dallas." Linda placed a document on the table, a public school graduation record. She graduated from Jefferson Davis High School in Houston, public school. No record of any university attendance. No record of a wealthy family in Dallas or anywhere else. She let that settle for a moment before continuing. She worked as a waitress, a casino dealer, and a promotional model in various cities across the South and Southwest between the ages of 18 and 23. And then, at 24, she married for the first time. Linda placed a photograph on the table. A wedding. Donna Reyes, younger, slightly different hair, standing beside a heavy-set man of about 60 with a kind face and a rental tuxedo that didn't quite fit him. They were both smiling. He looked happy in the uncomplicated way of a man who believes he has found something real. "Robert Owens," Linda said, 60 years old at the time of the marriage, owner of a chain of building supply stores in San Diego, widower, 2 adult children from his first marriage, a son and a daughter. She placed another document beside the photograph. They were married for 2 years. Robert died of a cardiac event at home on a Tuesday evening. He was cremated at Donna's request within 4 days. She inherited the house, the business, and liquid assets totaling approximately $2.8 million. The room was very quiet. "The daughter," I said. "Patricia Owens." Linda nodded. "Filed a complaint against Donna 6 weeks after Robert's death. Alleged harassment and threats. Withdrew the complaint 14 days later." She set a printout on the table, a transcript of a brief phone conversation Linda had recorded with Patricia's permission. "That woman is dangerous. I don't want anything to do with her or her money. Please don't contact me again." When I called back and pressed gently, she said one more thing before she hung up for good. Linda looked at her notes. "My father was a healthy man until he married her." She used the word healthy 3 times in one sentence. "I've been doing this long enough to know what that means." Linda paused to let that land. Then she continued. "Second marriage. Franklin Gallagher, 58 years old, textile manufacturer, Dallas, widower. They married when Donna was 27. She placed a second photograph. Another wedding, different city, same calculated smile on the bride's face. The marriage lasted 18 months. Franklin fell down the staircase of their home. He was in a coma for 3 weeks before he died. The house security cameras were broken, I said. Had been non-functional for 4 days. Linda looked at me steadily. Donna reported them broken the day before the fall. She said she'd been meaning to call a technician. She placed a bank statement on the table. What she didn't tell the investigators, and what took me 11 hours to find, is that Franklin Gallagher had consulted a divorce attorney 3 weeks before his death. He had also, in the 2 months prior, made repeated attempts to access certain joint bank accounts and found unexpected activity. She tapped the statement. Transfers. Donna's name on the authorization. Approximately $150,000 moved in small increments to an account in the Cayman Islands. I looked at Ethan. His face was the color of old paper. "Are you all right?" I asked him. "Keep going," he said quietly. Linda nodded once and continued. Third marriage, Joseph Voss, 62 years old, retired civil engineer, San Diego, widower, 1 son, Nathan Voss, 26 at the time. She placed a third photograph. Joseph Voss was a lean, silver-haired man with glasses and an open, intelligent face. Donna married him when she was 30. 6 months after the wedding, Joseph's son Nathan disappeared. She let the word sit there. Disappeared. He left a text message for his father saying he needed time to think, that he was going abroad for a while. No other contact. No forwarding address. No record of international travel under his legal name. Linda's voice was measured and precise, but I knew her well enough to hear what was underneath it. The controlled anger of a woman who has been looking at this material for 48 hours and has been building a very specific kind of fury. Joseph Voss fell into severe depression following Nathan's disappearance. He signed over financial power of attorney to Donna within a year. She had him placed in a memory care facility. He had early-stage dementia. This part was legitimate. Sold his home and his investment properties and left San Diego. She closed the folder. Estimated proceeds, approximately $4 million. The kitchen was completely silent except for the coffee maker finishing its cycle with a soft hiss. That was twist 2, and it arrived not like a thunderclap, but like a door swinging slowly open onto a room you knew, somewhere deep in your gut, you were always going to have to walk into. "Nathan Voss," I said. "Has anyone found him?" Linda looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'm working on it," she said. "Give me more time on that one." "How much more?" 24 hours. She paused. "Eleanor, there's something else." She reached into the folder and withdrew one final document, a series of bank records with certain account numbers highlighted. Gregory Holt, the lawyer. He appeared in the legal proceedings for all 3 marriages, wills, power of attorney documents, property transfers. He and Donna share a secondary account in the Cayman Islands, the same account to which Franklin Gallagher's money was transferred. She set it on the table. They've been doing this together for at least 10 years. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. 10 years. At least 3 men. At least 2 deaths that needed re-examining. And now my son, widower, grief vulnerable, with a teenage son who stood between Donna Reyes and an unobstructed path to the next inheritance. Ethan, who was sitting very still, said, "She wants me gone, like Nathan." "We don't know," Linda started. "She wants me gone like Nathan," he said again, not with fear, but with the flat, clear certainty of someone stating a fact they've been circling for days and have finally allowed themselves to land on. He looked at me. "What do we do?" I looked at him, then at Linda, then back at the table covered in photographs and bank records and the documented history of a woman who had spent a decade treating human families like investment vehicles. "We set a trap," I said. The spy cameras were Linda's find, button-sized, wireless, transmitting real-time video and audio to a paired phone application. She had them in my apartment by the following afternoon. We sat at the kitchen table and spent 40 minutes examining the shirt Ethan would wear, determining the 2 optimal placement points, and sewing the devices in with the kind of careful, close work that reminds you that investigation, at its heart, is about patience and precision and a willingness to do the unglamorous thing correctly. Ethan watched us sew camera buttons onto his shirt with an expression somewhere between solemn and surreal. "This is kind of insane," he said. "This is called evidence collection," I told him. "Same thing, at your age." Linda made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. I ignored it. The plan was straightforward in outline and fragile in execution, the way most good plans are. I would call Daniel, tell him Ethan needed to retrieve his clothes and school materials, and ask permission for a brief visit. Daniel would agree because whatever he had become in 5 years with Vivian, he had not become someone who would deny his son access to his own belongings, at least not yet, and not openly. Ethan would go in alone, behave normally, collect his things, and while he was there, look for the candlestick. Not touch it, not disturb it. Photograph it in place and leave it exactly where it was. Linda and I would be parked half a block away. I would watch the transmission on my phone. If anything went wrong, if Vivian became aggressive, if Ethan felt unsafe for any reason, he would say the words, "I should probably get going," and we would be at the front door inside 60 seconds. Spencer had agreed, off the record, to have a patrol car positioned 1 street over. What none of us planned for was what Vivian would say when she thought she was alone with Ethan. The morning of, I drove Ethan to Linda's house. Her husband, a quietly reliable man named Thomas, stayed with him while Linda and I ran a final systems check. At 1 o'clock, Linda drove us to the Upper East Side and we parked on a tree-lined street exactly 3/10 of a mile from the house where my son had been living for 5 years, and which I had entered exactly twice in that time. It was a handsome house. Brick, 2 stories, a small front garden, an iron gate, the kind of house that signals a certain level of comfort and solidity, the kind of house that is supposed to mean safety. At 2:55, Ethan stood outside the passenger door in the shirt with the buttons that weren't buttons, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked at me through the open window. "Remember," I said, "clothes, books, look for the candlestick. Don't touch it. Don't improvise. And if you feel unsafe, I should probably get going." He'd memorized the phrase the first time I said it. "I know, Grandma." I looked at him, this tall, serious, quietly brave boy who had been protecting himself in silence for 6 months because he thought no one would believe him. He deserved better than to have to do this. He deserved to be worried about calculus tests and whether the girl in his English class knew he existed, not this. "You don't have to do this," I said. "We can find another—" "I want to do it," he said, and the steadiness in his voice was not bravado. It was something older and cleaner than bravado. "Not just for me, Grandma. Nathan Voss has been in Guatemala for 4 years because nobody did anything. I don't want to be the next person who waited too long." He paused. "Besides, you'll be right here." I nodded. "Right here." He squared his shoulders and walked toward the house. On my phone screen, transmitted in clear, sharp detail from the button on his chest, I watched every moment. Vivian answered the door in athletic clothes, hair pulled back, no makeup, and somehow managed to look, even so, like a woman who was entirely in control of the situation she was in. Her eyes moved over Ethan with the quick, measuring efficiency of a predator clocking the dimensions of its territory. "You showed up," she said. "I thought you'd chicken out." "I came for my things. Dad said I could." "Your father says a lot of things. Come in, 30 minutes. Ethan went upstairs. The camera captured the hallway, the staircase, the landing. Captured his bedroom door opening onto devastation, clothes thrown across every surface, posters ripped down, desk overturned, books scattered. On the floor, face down in the wreckage, a broken picture frame. Ethan crouched and turned it over. A photograph of him and his mother. He would have been about 10 in the picture, and Carol was laughing at something outside the frame with her whole face, the way some people laugh, and most people can't. A shoe print pressed across the center of the image. Deliberate, unhurried, making a point. I watched Ethan pick the photograph up, wipe the glass carefully with his sleeve, and put it in his backpack. I had to look away from my phone screen for exactly 4 seconds. In the desk drawer, behind a pile of his scattered notebooks, the camera caught it, the unmistakable gleam of silver. The candlestick, heavy antique silver with ornate detailing at the base, and at the base, clearly visible even in the phone's small screen, dark staining, dried blood. "Ethan!" Vivian's voice from downstairs, sharp and carrying. "Time." Moving quickly, Ethan pulled out his personal phone and photographed the candlestick from multiple angles. Exact position, exact location in the drawer itself open within the larger context of the desk. Then he closed the drawer, shouldered his backpack, and went downstairs. And then Vivian made her mistake. She made it the way people like her always make mistakes. From overconfidence, from the particular blindness of someone who has never been caught and has therefore come to believe they cannot be. She was alone with a boy she'd reduced to silence for 6 months. There were no witnesses. The cameras that might have recorded anything were broken. And this old woman who had brought him here was, in Vivian's assessment, a 68-year-old retiree with a bad heart and no allies and no power left. So she talked. "This house belongs to your father, and I am his wife. You are just an accident he had to deal with for years. Ethan," his voice remarkably steady. "Is that why you hit kids? To feel powerful?" A step toward him, camera perfectly capturing her face. "When the old woman dies, and with that heart of hers, it won't be long, your father will inherit that house. We sell it. We move away. And you will be in a school in San Diego where someone else deals with you. You planned all of this. I plan everything, sweetheart. That's the difference between us." The front door opened. Daniel, home early, still in his office shirt with the tie loosened, stood in the entryway. His eyes moved between Ethan and Vivian, and then settled on Vivian with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. The raw, unmanaged expression of someone who is hearing something and cannot find a way to make it mean something other than what it means. "What did you just say about my mother's house?" Vivian turned. The shift in her face was instant. Predator to victim, one seamless motion. "Honey, you're home early. Ethan was just leaving." "Vivian." Daniel's voice was careful in the way that means the opposite of careful. "What did you say?" "She said when Grandma dies, you'll inherit the house and you'll sell it," Ethan said. "She said I'll be sent to San Diego. She said everything is already arranged." "That's not—" "I heard you. I heard what you said." The silence that followed was not the silence of resolution. It was the silence of a crack appearing in something that had looked solid for 5 years. That first hairline fracture that means the structure can still stand but will never be exactly what it was again. Daniel said very quietly, "Ethan, go." "Dad, please." Ethan went. He walked out the front door, down the path, through the gate, and when he reached the car and got into the back seat beside me, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "Did we get it?" "Every word," I said. He nodded once. Then he put his face in his hands and, for the first time since the night at the police station, let himself cry. I put my arm around him and let him, because some things need to be cried before they can be carried. Linda called at 7 the following morning, and the first thing she said was, "I found Nathan Voss." I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Where?" "Guatemala City. He's been there 4 years, working under a different name, living quietly, not contacting anyone." A pause. "Eleanor, he didn't leave. He was sent away. Holt gave him a fake passport, money, and a threat. If he came back to the States or contacted his father, Joseph Voss would have a fatal accident. Nathan was 26 years old and he believed it." Another pause, longer. "He didn't know his father died. In the nursing home, 14 months ago." I closed my eyes. "He wants to talk," Linda said. When I told him what Vivian was doing to another family, he cried. And then he said, "Tell me what I need to do to stop her." This was twist 3, and unlike the first 2, which had opened doors, this one blew a wall down entirely. Nathan Voss was alive. Nathan Voss could testify. And Nathan Voss had been waiting 4 years for someone to find him, not because he'd given up, but because the only person he could trust to find him would have to be the kind of person who didn't stop looking. I spent the rest of that morning with my leather notebook and my dining table covered in organized evidence, building the case the way I had built hundreds of cases over 3.5 decades. Methodically, from the foundation up, each piece in the place that would make it strongest. That evening, I sat down with Ethan and told him everything. Nathan Voss, the 3 marriages, Patricia Owens, Frank Gallagher's divorce plans, the Cayman Islands account, Gregory Holt's involvement. All of it plainly, without softening. When I finished, Ethan was quiet for a long time. "She was going to do the same thing to me that she did to Nathan," he said finally. "We believe so, yes. And to Dad, eventually, yes." He looked at his hands. Then he looked up at me. "She miscalculated one thing." "What's that?" "Nathan didn't have a grandmother like you." I had to look away for a moment, and I am not generally a woman who has to look away. The preparation for what came next took 3 days. Linda sourced 4 professional-grade cameras, the kind that make my button cameras look like children's toys, and we placed them in strategic positions throughout my living room and dining area. The bookshelf, the wall clock, the kitchen shelf, the floor lamp. From the bedroom, Linda could monitor all 4 feeds simultaneously on her laptop and record everything in high-definition audio and video. I laid out the scene carefully. Hospital billing statements, courtesy of Linda, who has a talent for realistic-looking paperwork, scattered on the dining table. Prescription bottles on the kitchen counter, nothing alarming, just visible enough to suggest a woman managing a declining situation. The apartment scrubbed and tidied, but left with the particular quality of a space maintained by someone fighting fatigue. Nothing quite as sharp as it should be. I wanted Vivian Harper to walk in and see exactly what she expected to see, an old woman who had run out of road. Then I called Daniel. It was the hardest phone call I had made since the one informing me of Carol's death. Not because of what I had to say, but because of how I had to say it, which was in the voice of defeat, and defeat has never come naturally to me. "I need to speak with Vivian," I said when he answered. "It's important." "About what?" "The house. About all of it." I let my voice sound tired, which required almost no effort because I was genuinely exhausted, just not in the way I was performing. "I'm tired of fighting, Daniel. I've been sick. I just want Ethan to be safe and you to be happy. If that means letting go of certain things, then I'm ready to have that conversation." There was a long pause. I could hear Vivian in the background, very faint. Not the words, just the presence. The way you can hear someone listening even when you can't hear them speak. "I'll talk to her," Daniel said finally. "I'll get back to you." 20 minutes later, he called back. Vivian would come. Saturday, 3 o'clock. She'd bring her lawyer. "I hope you're not playing games, Eleanor." Vivian's voice came on the line at the end, and something about the deliberate use of my first name landed like a small intended insult. "I'm not playing games," I said, with every ounce of weariness I could muster. "I'm just tired. I think we all are." I hung up and sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen. Then I looked at Linda, who was sitting across from me with her coffee, and I said, "Saturday, 3 o'clock. She's coming." Linda nodded slowly. "Then God help her," she said, "because we certainly won't." The night before Saturday, I stood on my balcony for a long time. The city below did what it always does. Moved, glittered, breathed, entirely indifferent to the specific weight of any individual life within it. I have always found this comforting rather than lonely. The city's indifference is a kind of democracy. It doesn't care about your grief any more than it cares about your joy. It just continues, which means you can continue too. I thought about Carol, Ethan's mother, Daniel's first wife. I thought about her laugh, which I can still hear clearly if I close my eyes, and the way she used to call me on Sunday afternoons just to talk, not about anything particular, just to maintain the thread. I thought about what she would make of all of this, and I decided she would make what she always made of difficulty, which was something workable. Carol was a pragmatist. She would have approved of the cameras. I thought about Daniel, not the stranger of the past 5 years, but the boy underneath him, the one who was still in there somewhere, visible for a moment in the parking lot of the police station when he'd heard Vivian say your father will inherit that house. The crack, the beginning of something. I thought about what I was asking him to survive, not just the revelation of what Vivian was, but the revelation of how completely he'd been managed, how many of his own choices had actually been hers, how many years he'd spent sleepwalking through a life someone else had designed for him while he believed he was free. That would be the hardest thing. Not the anger, not the shame, the reconstruction of his own judgment, the slow and painful work of learning to trust his own perceptions again after years of having them overridden. But that work could not begin until the lie was fully exposed. Saturday, 3 o'clock. I went inside. I checked the cameras one last time. I checked the recording equipment in the bedroom. I reviewed my notes. Then I went to Ethan's room. He was staying at Linda's house for the weekend, safe and out of range, and I sat on the edge of the empty bed for a moment, looking at the room I'd made for him over the past week. The extra pillow, the charging cable, the small framed photograph of him and his mother that he'd retrieved from the wreckage of his own bedroom and asked if he could keep here. I looked at Carol's laughing face in the photograph. "I've got him," I told her. "I'm sorry it took me this long, but I've got him now." I turned out the light and went to bed. Tomorrow, Vivian Harper was coming to my home, and she was not going to leave it the way she arrived. Saturday arrived the way important days often do, indistinguishable from any other until you're inside it. The morning was ordinary: coffee, toast. The man on the corner selling bagels called out his usual greeting when I walked past on my way back from the pharmacy. A woman I know from the 3rd floor was walking her elderly retriever, who has a bad hip and moves with the philosophical patience of someone who has made peace with slowness. I said good morning. She said good morning. The city hummed along beneath a pale October sky like it had no idea. Back in my apartment, Linda arrived at 8:30 with coffee from the Good Place 2 blocks over, and a bag that contained, in addition to 2 almond croissants, 4 additional battery packs for the recording equipment. She moved through my living room with the quiet efficiency of someone who has set up surveillance in more difficult conditions than a 3rd-floor walk-up in Greenwich Village, checking each camera position, confirming angles, testing audio levels. I stood in the kitchen and watched her work and felt the particular calm that used to come over me before difficult operations. Not the absence of tension, the organization of it. Every nerve ending pointed in the same direction. "How are you feeling?" Linda asked, without looking up from the laptop she was configuring on my dining table. "Ready?" I said. That's not what I asked. I considered the question honestly. "I'm angry," I said, "and I'm sad, both at the same time, which I'm told is called being human." I paused, but the anger is useful, and the sadness I can set aside for later. So ready. Linda looked up at me then, and whatever she saw in my face made her nod once with the particular gravity of someone who has known you for 20 years and trusts what they see. "I'll be in the bedroom," she said. "You won't be able to hear me, but I'll hear everything." At noon, I drove Ethan to Linda's house. Thomas met us at the door, a big, quiet man who had made Ethan 2 plates of scrambled eggs over the past several days and asked him questions about soccer and managed, through sheer gentle reliability, to make the boy feel temporarily safe in a world that had been demonstrating its unreliability for months. Ethan hugged me at the door. He held on a beat longer than usual. "Be careful, Grandma." "I'm always careful." "You're really not," he said into my shoulder. "But I believe in you anyway." I laughed, a real laugh, sudden and involuntary. I pulled back and looked at him. "Keep your phone on," I said. "I'll call you the moment it's over." "I know you will." He searched my face. "And Grandma, whatever happens with Dad, don't give up on him, even if he does something stupid today. Don't give up." I put my hand on his cheek. "I never have," I said. "I never will." At 2:55, I was sitting in my armchair, dressed in a pale gray blouse and dark skirt, colors chosen carefully to make me look older than I am, more fragile, more like a woman at the end of her resources. On the dining table behind me, the hospital billing statements, the prescription bottles, a glass of water with 2 aspirin beside it, untouched, positioned to be noticed. I had 1 lamp on. The afternoon light through the windows was soft and indirect. I looked, I hoped, exactly like what Vivian Harper expected to find. The doorbell rang at 2:58. She was early, which told me she was eager. Eager people make mistakes. I went to the door and opened it and let myself appear, just slightly, just enough, to be diminished by what I saw on the other side. Vivian Harper in a camel-colored business suit and heels, her hair in a smooth knot, composed and deliberate as a document. Beside her, Gregory Holt, 52 years old, silver-haired, the kind of expensive that announces itself quietly through small details, the watch, the briefcase, the way his shoes had been polished to a shine that reflected the hallway light. He had the face of a man who had told himself, over a long career of telling himself things, that facilitating evil is different from committing it. And behind both of them, Daniel. My son looked terrible. He had aged something beyond years in the week since the police station. There were new lines around his eyes and a grayness to his skin that comes from sleeping badly and thinking harder than the thoughts want to be thought. He was wearing a jacket and his good shoes, which told me Vivian had told him to dress appropriately, and he had complied without thinking about it, the way he'd been complying without thinking about things for 5 years. He didn't look at me when I opened the door. "Come in," I said softly, tiredly. "Thank you for coming." Vivian walked in first, which I had expected. She moved through my living room the way a buyer walks through a property, assessing, calculating, noting what she saw with barely concealed contempt for its modesty. Gregory Holt followed her, eyes moving professionally over the space. Daniel came in last and stood slightly apart from both of them, his hands at his sides. I gestured to the seating. Vivian took the armchair across from mine, the good one, the central one, with the easy authority of someone claiming territory. Gregory Holt sat on the dining chair I'd positioned near the table. Daniel sat in the chair by the window, slightly behind and to the left of Vivian, where she could see him in her peripheral vision, and he could not quite see her face directly. I had arranged the seating this way deliberately. "Thank you for coming," I said again, and settled into my own armchair with the careful movement of a woman managing physical discomfort. "I know this isn't easy for anyone." "We're here, Eleanor," Vivian said with the brisk warmth of someone who considers warmth a tool rather than a quality. "You said you wanted to talk about the house." "I did." I looked at my hands. "I've been thinking a great deal this week, about what matters, about how much time I have left, and how I want to spend it." I let a pause land. "I don't want to spend it fighting." Gregory Holt opened his briefcase. "Ms. Stone, I've prepared documents for a voluntary property transfer." "In a moment," I said mildly. "I'd like to talk first, if you don't mind. There's something I want to understand." I looked at Vivian. "I want to understand what you want for Ethan, long term, because before I sign anything, I need to know that he'll be taken care of." Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Vivian's expression, a small recalibration, the adjustment of someone who had expected more resistance and is now encountering less than expected and cannot quite decide whether to be pleased or suspicious. She chose pleased. That was her mistake. "Ethan's future is something Daniel and I have thought about carefully," she said. "There are excellent schools." "She means boarding schools," Daniel said, from his chair by this window. It was the first thing he'd said since arriving, and his voice had a flatness to it that I recognized. The voice of a man who is saying something out loud in order to hear how it sounds. "She's been talking about a boarding school in San Diego." "It's an option," Vivian said smoothly, "for a young man who needs—" "I know what it is," Daniel said. He was looking at his hands. I let the moment pass without pressing it. Not yet. I had learned in 35 years of interrogation that silence, deployed correctly, is the most powerful thing in any room. People feel silence. They can't help it. And what they fill it with is almost always more useful than anything you could ask them directly. I turned back to Vivian. "Tell me something," I said in the voice of a woman making gentle conversation. "How long have you been planning this? The house, the move, the hotel in Miami?" I kept my voice entirely without edge, simply curious, simply an old woman asking a simple question. "It sounds like a wonderful plan, a boutique hotel. I'd love to hear about it." And there it was. The satisfaction that had been sitting underneath Vivian's performance since she walked in the door, sitting there like a coal, banked and controlled, flared. She couldn't help it. She had been planning this for 5 years. She had executed every piece of it with patience and precision. She had managed a grieving man back into dependency, isolated him from his family, positioned his teenage son as a delinquent, disabled the cameras, manufactured the evidence, and now she was sitting in the home of the last obstacle between herself and everything she'd spent 5 years building toward. And that obstacle was a tired old woman with aspirin on the table and hospital bills she'd left out where anyone could see them. She had won. She knew she had won. And people who know they've won cannot resist, when given the opening, explaining exactly how. "It's a lovely plan," Vivian said, and her voice shed its careful professional warmth like a coat coming off. What was underneath it was colder and more honest. "Daniel and I have worked very hard to get to this point." "Have you?" I kept my voice gentle, admiring even. "You have no idea how much work it takes," she said, "to manage a situation like this. Every detail, every variable." She glanced at Daniel, who was still looking at his hands. "He needed someone to take care of things. He always has. That's not a criticism. It's just a fact about certain people. They need management." She turned back to me, and something in her eyes had gone entirely flat and clear, the way very deep water looks from above. Calm on the surface, cold all the way down. "You were the main complication, honestly. You and your opinions and your interference. Do you have any idea how many times I had to undo a phone call you made, or a visit Ethan snuck in to see you?" "I imagine it was quite a few," I said, "constantly, for 5 years." She shook her head with something that looked almost like admiration for her own patience. "But you know what I realized? The simplest solution was always the most elegant one. You were going to die eventually. Older than you should be for your age, honestly. The heart issues, She glanced at the prescription bottles on the kitchen counter. "The various complications. It was just a matter of time and patience." Gregory Holt shifted in his chair. "Vivian." His voice had the tone of a lawyer who has heard a client say something they shouldn't have and is calculating damage. "Perhaps we should focus on—" "Sit down, Gregory," Vivian said without looking at him. "We're having a conversation." He sat. I noted with professional satisfaction that he had not said stop. He had said focus on. There is a difference, and it tells you something important about a man. "And Ethan?" I said. "In this plan of yours. The school in San Diego is a good school, structured, disciplined. He'll benefit from it, honestly. He's been indulged." She tilted her head slightly. "He's like you know. That's the problem. Too much of you in him. The stubbornness, the refusal to accept how things are." I heard Daniel make a sound. Very small, almost inaudible, but I heard it. "Vivian," I said, and my voice changed. Not raised, not sharpened. Simply restored. The voice I had used for 35 years. The voice that changed the temperature of rooms. "I want to make sure I understand you correctly. You're telling me that you managed my son's perception of his own family for 5 years, that you planned to wait for my death to access my property, that you have a plan to remove my grandson to a boarding school in another state, and that you have been, throughout all of this, acting with Gregory Holt as a business partner." I paused. "Is that an accurate summary?" The silence in the room had a different quality now. Vivian heard it. I watched her hear it. Watched the first finger of doubt reach through the satisfaction and touch something underneath. "What I've said is—" "Enough," I said. "That's what it is. It's enough." I stood up, and I walked to the bedroom door and knocked twice. Linda came out with her laptop open, the recording application running, the timestamp visible. 4 simultaneous feeds showing every angle of my living room in high-definition clarity. "Deputy Commander Linda Davis," she said, setting the laptop on the dining table so both screens faced the room. "Private investigations, licensed in the state of New York. Everything said in this room in the last 40 minutes has been recorded under New York state law, which permits single-party consent recording in a private residence." Gregory Holt was on his feet. "This is entrapment." "It isn't," I said. "You came to my home of your own volition. You were not induced to say anything you didn't choose to say. Single-party consent recording in a private residence is entirely legal in this state, as you would know if you were still a competent attorney." I looked at him steadily. "Which you won't be for much longer." I took out my phone and dialed Ray Spencer. "Captain Spencer, you can come up now." Vivian stood very still. She had gone in the span of about 90 seconds. From a woman who believed she had won to a woman processing the architecture of her own defeat, and I watched her do it with the detached professional attention of someone who has watched that particular transition many times. The stillness before the reaction. The moment when the story a person has been telling themselves encounters the uncooperative facts. Then she turned to Daniel, and I saw in her face for the first time something genuine, not love. I don't think Vivian Harper has ever experienced love in any form that would be recognizable to the people in that room. But something real. Urgency. The specific urgency of someone whose plan depends on a particular variable behaving in a particular way. Daniel, her voice shifted back into its warmth, but the warmth was frantic now, badly calibrated, a performance running on emergency power. Honey, this is a setup. You can see that. Your mother has always hated me. She's always wanted to separate us. This is exactly what she's been trying. You said I needed management, Daniel said. He was still sitting in the chair by the window, and he hadn't moved throughout any of it. He was looking at Vivian now, not with the blankness I had seen at the police station, with something else. Something slow and enormous moving behind his eyes, the way you can see weather moving across an open landscape before it arrives. You said I needed management, he said again. Like a situation. Like a variable. I didn't mean you planned for my mother to die. His voice was very quiet, the quietest I had heard it. You planned for it, as a timeline, as a business event. Daniel and Ethan, you were going to send Ethan to San Diego. He stood up slowly. You were going to take my son and... He stopped, put his hand over his mouth for a moment. When he took it away, his eyes were wet. Carol's son, he said very softly. You were going to take Carol's son and put him on a plane and make sure he was someone else's problem. The footsteps on the stairs were Ray Spencer's. 2 officers with him, which I had asked for, not because I expected violence, but because I have learned in 35 years that clarity of consequence is a kindness, even to people who have forfeited the right to it. Ray came in, took in the room in the way a good officer takes in a room. Everything, instantly, organized into what matters, and looked at me. Commander Stone. He used my title without thinking about it, the way it comes back to people when the situation calls for it. Do you have what we need? Everything, Linda said, and turned the laptop so Spencer could see the 4 recording feeds and the timestamp and the waveform of the audio that had been running, uninterrupted, for the past 41 minutes. Spencer looked at Vivian Harper, then at Gregory Holt. He nodded to the officers. Donna Lee Reyes, also known as Vivian Harper, he said. Gregory Allen Holt, you are under arrest pending formal charges including fraud, extortion, assault on a minor, conspiracy to commit fraud, and additional charges to be determined in consultation with the district attorney's office. He paused. You have the right to remain silent. Arrived not with drama, but with the quiet devastation of a door swinging open on something that had been closed for years. 3 days later, in a conference room at the district attorney's office, Gregory Holt's attorney delivered the news. His client was cooperating fully with the prosecution. All of it. Every marriage, every transfer, every document he had prepared and filed and notarized and laundered into legitimacy. The Cayman Islands account, its full history, every transaction, every split. His client was prepared to testify against Donna Lee Reyes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Ray Spencer called me from the hallway outside the conference room. Eleanor, Holt has given us everything. And I mean everything. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I took the call, and Ethan was across from me doing calculus homework. And when I hung up, I said, Gregory Holt just handed us the case. Ethan put down his pencil. He turned on her? Without hesitation, apparently, once he understood the weight of what they were facing. I set down the phone, which tells you something about the foundation of the partnership. What does it tell you? That there was no loyalty there. There never is. In arrangements built entirely on mutual benefit. The moment the benefit calculus changes, so does the arrangement. I looked at him. Remember that. He nodded, with the expression of someone filing something away permanently. The day before the restaurant meeting, Linda called with the final piece. She had been in contact with Nathan Voss for 2 weeks. He had been working with the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala City to establish the documentation necessary to return home, and with a therapist in Guatemala City to prepare for what returning home would mean. He had given a full recorded statement. Everything Holt had told him in that room 4 years ago. Every threat, every instruction, the passport, the money, the plane ticket to Guatemala City, and the years of enforced silence while his father declined alone in a nursing home 900 miles away. He was ready to testify. He was, Linda said quietly, also ready to meet me, if I was willing. Tell him yes, I said. Tell him whenever he's ready. The morning of the Oak Leaf Cafe, I woke before dawn and lay in the dark for a while, listening to the city, and thought about what I was about to do and why I was doing it this way. In a public restaurant, with witnesses, with Ray Spencer at a nearby table and a notary beside me, rather than simply in a prosecutor's office with everyone already in custody. Daniel needed to see it. That was the truth I kept coming back to. Not hear about it, not read a summary. See it. Because the particular damage that Vivian Harper had done to my son was not only external, the lost years, the severed relationships, the harm to Ethan. The deeper damage was internal. She had rewritten his perception of reality. She had taught him, over 5 years of patient, systematic effort, to distrust his own judgment, to see his mother as a threat, to see his son as a burden, to see himself as someone who needed to be managed. For that damage to begin healing, he needed more than a conviction. He needed a moment in which the truth was so undeniable, so completely, visibly real, that it could not be revised or softened or made to mean something else after the fact. He needed to see Donna Lee Reyes without her costume on. So I chose a bright Saturday afternoon in a restaurant with good light, where a woman named Patricia Owens was already seated at a table near the window when we arrived, and a laptop was open on the table with Nathan Voss's face on the screen, and a man named Ray Spencer was in a booth with a cup of coffee and the look of someone who has been doing this job for 30 years and has learned to be patient. Vivian came in with her attorney, not Gregory Holt, who was currently in a very different kind of meeting, a public defender whose face carried the expression of someone who had read the file and was operating under no particular optimism. She wore dark clothes and the ankle monitor under her left pant leg. The confidence was still there, or something performing the shape of confidence, but it moved differently now, maintained through effort rather than ease, like a building held up by additional structures after the original foundation has shifted. She sat across from me, and I placed the folder on the table between us, and I opened it. I will not recount every minute of what followed, because some of it belongs to the people who were there and no one else. But I will say this. Patricia Owens, who had spent 4 years refusing to speak about what had happened to her family, spoke for 11 minutes. Her voice was steady the entire time. Nathan Voss, on the screen of Linda's laptop, spoke for 8 minutes. When he described waking up in a room he didn't recognize with Gregory Holt standing over him, explaining what would happen to his father if he made contact with anyone in the United States, Daniel put his head in his hands and did not lift it for a long time. The bank statements, the Cayman Islands account, the timeline of 3 marriages and 3 inheritances and 1 young man exiled to Guatemala so he wouldn't complicate the 4th, and Gregory Holt's full written confession, which his attorney had submitted to the district attorney the previous morning, which laid out in the flat, effectless language of legal documentation exactly what had happened and when and who had decided it, and who had made it possible. Vivian said nothing for most of it. She sat with her hands folded on the table, and I watched her face do the work of a person who is reorganizing their strategy in real time, looking for the angle, the reframe, the version of events that could still be constructed from what remained. Because that is what people like Donna Lee Reyes do. They look for the angle. They believe, even in the moments that would disabuse most people of the belief, that there is always an angle. When the officers approached, Spencer had arranged for them to wait outside until I gave the signal, which was placing both hands flat on the table. She turned to Daniel one last time. "You know this is what she wanted," she said to him. The warmth was entirely gone now. What remained was just the cold, clear voice of a woman who has stopped performing. "She's been trying to take you back your whole marriage. You were happy with me. Whatever she's shown you today." "I heard you call me a variable," Daniel said. He still had not raised his head from his hands. He said it without looking at her, and his voice was so tired it was almost without inflection. "I heard you say I needed management. I heard you plan my mother's death like a business calendar item." He lifted his head finally and looked at her. "We weren't happy, Vivian. I was managed. Those are different things. I just didn't know the difference because I couldn't remember what the real thing felt like. He paused. I remember now. The officers came in. This was Climax 2, and it was not a thunderclap. It was a slow, irreversible sunrise. The kind that doesn't announce itself, just arrives, until the darkness is simply gone, and you can see everything clearly, and you wonder how you ever mistook the dark for a room you could live in. The sentencing was 3 months after the arrest. I had been to many sentencing hearings in my career, as an investigator, as a witness, occasionally as the person who had worked the case that put the defendant in that chair. They are, in my experience, rarely the cathartic events that people expect them to be. The work is already done. The truth has already been established. The hearing is the administrative conclusion, necessary, important, but quieter than the work that preceded it. This one was different. Ethan sat to my right in a charcoal suit we had bought together at a department store on a Tuesday afternoon, during which he had made me laugh 3 times and tried on a hat that looked ridiculous and put it back without being asked. Daniel sat to my left. Between us, in that quiet courtroom that smelled of old wood and paper and the particular gravity of decisions made within its walls, we were a family of 3 who had been, a year ago, effectively strangers. The room was full. Patricia Owens sat in the front row with her husband. Nathan Voss, back on American soil for the first time in 4 years, sat 3 rows behind us. He was thin and quiet, and had the careful, measured quality of someone who has learned to take nothing for granted. We had met twice in the weeks before the hearing, and on the second meeting he had told me, simply and without drama, "Thank you for not stopping." I had not known what to say to that, which is unusual for me, so I had simply said, "You were worth finding." Ray Spencer sat in the second row in a civilian jacket, off-duty, present by choice. Linda sat beside him and winked at me when I came in. Climax 3 arrived not in the form of revelation. All revelations had already been made, but in the form of consequence. Judge Martha Calloway was 60 years old, gray-haired, with the kind of face that has been shaped by decades of sitting in judgment of the worst possibilities of human behavior, and has arrived at a kind of weathered, unsentimental compassion that is the most useful thing a judge can carry into a courtroom. She read the verdict and the charges. She acknowledged the statements from the victims' families. She noted Gregory Holt's cooperation in determining his reduced sentence, 22 years, law license permanently revoked. Then she looked at Donna Lee Reyes. "Before I pronounce sentence," the judge said, "I would like to offer you the opportunity to speak." Donna stood. She was in the orange of the county jail, her hair pulled back in a way that had none of the deliberate arrangement I had always seen in it before. She looked, without the performance and the costuming, like exactly what she was, a woman of 36 who had spent her adult life taking from people and had arrived, finally, at the place where the account came due. "This is a miscarriage of justice," she said. Her voice was steady and cold and entirely without remorse. "I am the victim of a coordinated campaign by a resentful woman who could not accept that her son chose a life she wasn't part of. Everything I did for my family. And someday, that will be understood." The courtroom was very quiet. Judge Calloway looked at her for a long moment. "Ms. Reyes," the judge said, "in 25 years on this bench, I have encountered many defendants. Some express genuine remorse. Some, understandably, say nothing. A very few maintain, even at this stage, that they have been wronged by the very process of justice." She paused. "You fall into that last category, and I want you to understand what that means, not for the record, but for yourself, if you are capable of hearing it. It means that you have not, at any point in these proceedings, demonstrated awareness of the human cost of what you have done. Not to Patricia Owens, who lost her father. Not to Nathan Voss, who lost 4 years of his life and was not present when his father died. Not to a 16-year-old boy who documented his own abuse in secret because he did not believe any adult would listen to him." The judge's voice did not rise. It simply continued, with the inexorable quality of something that has been true for a long time. "That absence of awareness is, in my assessment, the most relevant fact before this court today." She opened the sentencing document. Aggravated fraud, 3 counts, 12 years. Extortion, 6 years. Involuntary manslaughter in the death of Robert Owens, based on the toxicology evidence that had been re-examined following Gregory Holt's cooperation and the discovery of purchasing records for Digitalis, 15 years. Kidnapping of Nathan Voss, 20 years. Criminal conspiracy, 5 years. Sentences to be served consecutively, the judge said. Total, 58 years. A sound moved through the room. Not applause, not celebration. Something quieter and more complicated than either of those things. The sound of a collection of people absorbing a number and understanding what it means. 58 years. Donna Reyes would be 94 years old at the end of it. I sat very still and felt the number settle. Not with triumph. Not with the satisfaction I might have expected after months of work and preparation and sleepless nights, and the long, cold labor of building a case strong enough to hold. What I felt was something closer to the feeling at the end of a very long operation, the particular exhaustion of sustained attention finally released, and underneath it, the quiet, clean knowledge that the thing has been done correctly. Daniel beside me reached over and took my hand. I looked at him. His face was wet. He didn't try to hide it or explain it or apologize for it, which told me more about how he was changing than anything he could have said. I held his hand and looked at the front of the courtroom where the judge was completing her paperwork, and Donna Lee Reyes was being led away by 2 officers who treated her with the professional indifference of people for whom this is Tuesday. She looked back, once, at the room, looking for something. I'm not sure what. Perhaps for Daniel. Perhaps for the angle she was still trying to find. The version of this she could still construct into something that worked in her favor. She didn't find it, because it wasn't there. The door closed behind her. Outside the courthouse, the October afternoon had turned cold and bright, the kind of day that feels scrubbed clean, everything in it sharp and clear-edged. Patricia Owens found me on the steps and took both my hands and said simply, "Thank you." I told her she had been brave, and she had been, braver than she knew, to speak in that courtroom about her father. She shook her head. "You made it possible to be brave. There's a difference." Nathan Voss was quieter. We stood together for a moment at the bottom of the steps while Ethan and Daniel talked on the sidewalk a few feet away, and Nathan looked out at the street with the expression of someone relearning how familiar things look after a long absence. "It's strange to be back," he said. "I imagine it is. I keep thinking I should call my father." He paused. "And then I remember." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to start the foundation in his name, a scholarship for civil engineering students." He looked at me. He would have liked that. He always said the best thing a person could build was something that lasted after them. "He was right," I said. "See," he said. "So are you." He glanced over at Ethan, who was saying something that was making Daniel laugh. A real laugh, surprised out of him, the laugh of a man rediscovering that he has one. "You built something that lasted, Commander Stone, even when they tried to tear it down." I didn't know what to say to that either. After a while, Linda came and stood beside me and watched the street with her coffee. The afternoon crowd moved around us in both directions, entirely unaware that anything had concluded. "How do you feel?" she asked. "The same as after every case," I said. "Ready for what comes next." "And what comes next?" I watched Daniel put his arm around Ethan's shoulder and say something close to his son's ear, and watched Ethan lean into it for a moment. The lean of a person who has been offered something they thought was lost and is testing whether it's real. "Harder work," I said. "Better work." Arrived 6 weeks later in the form of a phone call from Linda. Patricia Owens had formally established the foundation. It would provide legal and investigative resources to families affected by predatory marriage fraud, a gap in services that Linda and I had been acutely aware of throughout the case, the way there is no system for what had happened to all these families, no single place to go, no protocol for the particular kind of damage that had been done to them. Patricia had named it the Eleanor Stone Foundation for Family Protection. "She says you restored her faith that the truth can win if someone fights for it long enough," Linda told me. "She wants to know if you'd be willing to serve on the advisory board." I sat in my kitchen for a moment, holding the phone, looking at the cinnamon stick warming on the stove. "Tell her yes," I said. 6 months after the sentencing, I woke up on a Saturday morning in May to the sound of people in my kitchen. The particular acoustics of my apartment mean that I can hear the kitchen from my bedroom if I leave both doors slightly open, which I've done since Ethan moved in because old habits of parental vigilance don't fully uninstall themselves, apparently, even when the child is 17 and 3 inches taller than you. I lay in bed and listened to the specific music of 2 people making breakfast. The deliberate clatter of a person who doesn't quite know where everything is yet, moving around someone who does. I could hear them talking. Not the words, just the cadence. Back and forth, with occasional pauses and what sounded from this distance like laughter. I stayed in bed for an extra 5 minutes, which I never do, just to listen to it. When I came into the kitchen, Daniel was at the stove. My stove, which he has known since childhood but is relearning now, which seems right, somehow. And Ethan was at the counter cutting fruit with the focused concentration of someone who has decided that if he is going to do a thing, he is going to do it properly. There was coffee made. There were bagels from the corner man. There was a small vase with flowers in it that had not been there yesterday, and which told me someone had planned this. Had gone out this morning before I woke up specifically to buy them. "Happy birthday, Grandma," Ethan said without looking up from the cutting board. I had completely forgotten. 69 years old. A whole life. "You didn't have to," I started. "We wanted to," Daniel said. He turned from the stove and looked at me, and I saw in his face what I have been seeing gradually more of over the past months. Not the blankness, not the managed remove of a man living inside someone else's script. Just Daniel, my son, older and more careful than the boy I raised, marked by things that happened and things he allowed to happen and things he is still making his peace with. But there, present, his own. "Sit down, Mom," he said. "We made eggs." We ate breakfast at the small kitchen table with our knees almost touching, because the table was always designed for one and is genuinely inadequate for 3, but none of us have suggested getting a larger one, because there's something in the inadequacy that is itself a comfort, the specific pleasure of being a little too close. After we ate, Ethan produced a package wrapped in green paper and placed it in the center of the table. It was a photograph album, not old photographs, new ones. 6 months of them, from the day after the sentencing forward, assembled and annotated in Ethan's precise handwriting. The 3 of us at a diner in Brooklyn on a rainy Tuesday evening, eating pancakes for dinner because Ethan had declared it was that kind of day. Daniel and Ethan at a soccer game, standing in front of a bleacher with matching expressions of people enduring something cheerfully. A photograph of me and Linda at the opening of the Eleanor Stone Foundation's first community event, both of us in good jackets and squinting slightly into the sun. The 3 of us planting a cherry tree in the community garden on West 11th Street. City permit obtained by Ray Spencer through channels he declined to specify. Ethan on moving day, standing in front of his first Georgetown dorm room with the expression of someone trying to appear casual about being terrified. On the last page, a photograph I didn't remember being taken. The 3 of us on my small balcony, the city behind us, laughing at something outside the frame. Underneath it, in Daniel's handwriting, "Family isn't always the people who show up first. Sometimes it's the people who show up when it counts, and the ones who never stop showing up at all. Thank you, Mom, for never giving up on us." I looked at the handwriting for a long time. Then I closed the album and set it on the table and looked at my son and my grandson. These 2 people who are, in ways that matter more than I can articulate, the central fact of my life. "I have something to tell you both," Daniel said. He had the expression of a man who has rehearsed something. "I've been seeing a therapist, twice a week for the past 4 months. I wanted to be sure it was working before I mentioned it." He looked at me. "She's helping me understand how I let it happen. The isolation, the compliance. Why I needed someone to make my decisions for me after Carol died, and why I didn't notice what that need had cost me." He paused, and she said something last week that I've been thinking about since. She said that the people I hurt by being absent were the same people who never stopped loving me through it, and that the hardest thing I would probably have to learn is how to accept that. Ethan said quietly. "You don't have to earn it back from me, Dad. I already gave it back." "I know," Daniel said. "I'm working on believing it." I reached across the small, inadequate table and put one hand over Daniel's and one hand over Ethan's. "This is not a short process," I said. "What you're doing, Daniel, the therapy, the work, that takes time. And healing a family that's been hurt takes longer than healing a person. There will be hard days. There will be days when old patterns come back and you won't know why." I looked at them both. "But you're here, both of you, at this table. And that means we are already past the hardest part." "The hardest part," Ethan repeated. "What was the hardest part?" I looked at him. This boy who was going to be a lawyer, who was going to fight for families that had no one to fight for them, who had spent 6 months documenting his own abuse in a hidden folder because he trusted that someday someone would ask to see it. Believing it was worth fighting for, I said, when you can't see the other side, when the people you love can't see you clearly, when everything is arranged against you and you have no proof except what you know in your own heart. I paused. That's the hardest part, choosing to fight anyway. Ethan nodded slowly. You chose. Every morning, I said, and I would choose it again. That evening, Daniel took us to a small restaurant on the west side that had been there since before he was born and makes a lamb dish that I have been ordering since 1984. We sat at a corner table and talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing. Ethan's first weeks at Georgetown, Daniel's new position at a smaller firm with better hours, the Foundation's upcoming community workshop, a movie they both wanted to see that I had never heard of and submitted to hearing about at considerable length. At one point, I excused myself and stepped outside for a moment, ostensibly for air. I stood on the sidewalk in the evening cool, the restaurant warm and lit behind me through the glass, and I could see them inside. Daniel saying something with his hands, the way he always did when he was arguing a point he cared about. Ethan listening with his chin in his hand and the expression of someone waiting politely to disagree. I thought about Vivian Harper in her cell, 58 years. I did not think about it with satisfaction or grief or anything that could be neatly named. I thought about it the way you think about weather, as a fact about the world that is neither personal nor impersonal, simply true. I thought about all the people she had hurt and could no longer reach. And then I stopped thinking about her entirely, which is the only appropriate way to think about people who have spent their lives trying to be the most important thing in every room they enter. I went back inside. You were supposed to be getting air, Ethan said. I got it, I said. It was adequate. Adequate, Daniel repeated and laughed, and the laugh was the laugh I remembered, the real one, the one that comes from somewhere unguarded. And I sat down and picked up my menu and thought, there it is. There he is. I knew you were still in there. 7 months after that evening, on a cold January morning, I woke up early and made coffee and took it to the balcony. The city was quiet in the way it only ever is before 6 a.m. Not silent, never silent, but hushed, as though it is gathering itself before the day begins. I thought about Eleanor Stone, age 33, walking into her first major case with a leather notebook, and the particular determination of someone who has decided that the truth matters enough to spend a life in pursuit of it. I thought about Eleanor Stone, age 68, in the dark at 2:47 in the morning, reaching for a phone that was ringing with news she already knew would be bad. I thought about the distance between those two women and whether it constituted wisdom or simply mileage, and decided, in the quiet of that January morning, that there might not be as much difference between those two things as people generally claim. My phone buzzed on the balcony railing. Grandma, Georgetown Library open until midnight. Studying property law. Did you know adverse possession is basically legalized squatting if you wait long enough? Anyway, good night. Love you. I looked at the message for a moment. Then I typed back. Property law is how it starts. Wait until you get to criminal procedure. Good night, my boy. I love you too. I set the phone down and picked up my coffee and looked out at the city beginning in its unhurried way to wake. Somewhere in this city, in a building with thick walls and regulated light, Donna Lee Reyes was beginning her 58th year of consequence. Somewhere in this city, my son was asleep in an apartment 10 minutes from mine, on a morning when he did not have to be managed, was not being handled, was simply a man in the ordinary and underrated dignity of his own life. Somewhere in Guatemala City, a man named Nathan Voss was building a scholarship fund in his father's name. And here, on this balcony, was Eleanor Stone, 69 years old, retired 8 years, fully awake at 5:47 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, who had spent 35 years learning that the truth can be found if you are willing to look for it in the dark, in the cold, in the hours when everyone else has given up and gone home, who had spent the past year learning something else, that the same is true of love.